I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, outs, and nitty-gritty so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Georgia Tann.
Who was Georgia Tann? Well, she was an American social worker who operated an unlicensed adoption agency beginning in the 1920s. Over the next 30 years, Tann is estimated to have kidnapped and sold upwards of 5,000 children with the help of her network of paid-off police officers, healthcare workers, lawyers, and judges. In coordinating these black market adoptions, Tann effectively destroyed thousands of families while manufacturing thousands more, and she became a millionaire in the process.
Act 1. No matter how much things change, they stay the same, including human trafficking. As a child, few things are as terrifying as being separated from or losing your parents. From an extremely early age, we intuitively understand that our parents are not only caregivers, but the foundations of our developing sense of security. They are the ones we run to when we get scared, the only ones who can restore a sense of normalcy when the trials of childhood feel too big for us to manage alone. Losing your parents strips you of this comfort, leaving you alone to face an onslaught of fears incomprehensible to your still developing brain. For most of history, orphaned or abandoned children faced extreme uncertainty and vulnerability. At best, these kids were cared for by relatives or taken in by charitable institutions, though conditions and treatments in these situations varied greatly. In many cases, fending for oneself on the streets seemed preferable to the environments provided by these institutions. Throughout the 1800s, the idea of adoption inched slowly closer to what we know it as today. Yet it was still not legally regulated, and there was little to no oversight. Starting in the 1850s, the majority of adoptions that took place in America were handled through a welfare program known as the orphan train. The orphan train, which is the dark cousin to Soul Train.
Dude, as you were reading that, I was like, the orphan train is a great idea for like a YA novel title.
It's either like a boxcar children's style, like it takes place in like the early 1900s, and it's about like a train of like orphans that just travel around the country on adventures, or it's a like dystopian sci-fi YA about like some future society where there's just like a train that travels and it's full of orphans and it's controlled by some weird dictator robot guy.
Yeah, 100%. You know, we follow a young orphan girl who has to fight her way through the underworld orphan street gangs of Orphanopolis as she attempts to infiltrate the Imperial High Command by being conscripted, quote unquote, against her will, but she really wants to be conscripted so she can work as a double agent for the Orphan Underground. And the twist is that the guy who's the like kid dictator of this orphan world is secretly her brother.
So we're deleting this from the podcast and then writing this book and making $3 million on this idea that neither of us are actually in any way passionate about and do not want to make, but we know that we can just like get rich from it, right?
100%. That's how creativity works. That's why we're making this podcast.
Here's a little insight into the show, which you kind of get a sense of if you listen, but there's a variety of types of episodes we do. Sometimes it's an episode that was written by Dave. Sometimes it's an episode that was written by me. Sometimes it's an episode that was written by a guest writer, as this one is.
Who wrote the episode?
Armaun Saheli. He wrote the Pimp My Ride episode. He wrote the George Harriman. I always almost say Charles Harriman for some reason. He wrote the Sleeping Sickness episode. Really good episodes written by Armaun. But sometimes it's an episode where one of us or a guest writes it and we do like a fair amount of research on it. Like the person that didn't write it will have to, watch a whole documentary or do a bunch of article reading. There's a need for them to become knowledgeable of the story before we do it. And sometimes The person who didn't write it is just cold reacting. They've never read this. They don't know the story at all. And we kind of do that based on like which one would be better, right? Like sometimes it's better if the other person knows a lot about it. And sometimes it's better if they know nothing about it and they're just like reacting to it. And one episode that comes to mind is the
Velocity Gnome.
That one too. You did not know anything about the story going into it. And the whole joy of that episode was that you were actually experiencing the story as we went through it. So you were like a stand-in, you were an avatar for the audience.
And that was a choice too, because before I was like, oh, should I do research on this, whatever. And you were like, no, literally don't even read the script.
So sometimes that's better. In this situation, Dave did not read anything about this story before we started recording it. So sometimes there's a funny reaction whenever we do the intro. And there was a funny reaction when we did the episode about the Norwegian reality show where a lady sold off her kidney, where you read the intro and you were like, what the fuck? Like you had like a reaction, and we left that into the episode because I thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious that in the reading of the intro, you're just like, what is this? You had a similar reaction here where we were reading the intro and you were like, this is a dark cuts.
Yep.
So as we get into this episode, that was sort of Dave's reaction to just hearing the premise of the episode is like, uh-oh, like we're getting into some dark cuts territory. And really, we're getting into that future privilege territory that we talked about. We're about to experience a story that happened in a time when the default emotion anyone felt was misery. So just keep that in mind. We're getting into the dark territories. This program was organized by 3 separate charitable institutions: the Children's Village, the Children's Aid Society, and New York Foundling Hospital. The program sought to place homeless, orphaned, or abandoned city children in foster homes throughout the country, and almost immediately faced criticism for failing to screen caretakers or conduct any follow-up visits with placed children. So this is an example right here where like society is nowhere near perfect. There's a lot of really fucked up, cruel things that happen in the system, whether it be the private sector or the civil sector. There are people who are mistreated and treated cruelly and lost in the system. Absolutely still happens today. But it's like not supposed to, The rule is that organizations like orphanages and charitable organizations are supposed to be very tightly regulated and above board. And people who are responsible for overseeing children are supposed to be heavily vetted, and it's supposed to be made sure that nothing bad is happening. But back in the 1800s, it was the Wild West. Literally, it was the Wild West.
Literally, it was the Wild West. Adoptions hit different back then, bro. Adoptions were just kind of like, you want to fucking take this fucking kid? All right, fucking chill, dude.
Listen, we woke up this morning, there was like 5 more of these things in here. You want to take one?
Yeah, it was almost kind of like the reverse of like wanted posters, where it used to be like you'd go into a bank or a sheriff's office and you'd see like a row of wanted posters and you'd get your 6-shooter and you'd get on your horse and you'd be like, I'm going to go kill and or kidnap this person and bring them into justice. And adoption at that point was like, I'm gonna go father and or employ this child.
Yeah.
Just bring them in, put them to work. Maybe I'll love them if they're extra good.
Yeah. And that's the direct reason, and this isn't a joke, but there's that thing that you've heard of probably where you can like leave a baby outside of a fire station and they'll like take it and do what they need to do with the baby. That's like a thing that has just been passed down, and fire stations have just continued to uphold this tradition that they've had. But it's a direct holdover or tradition from a time when there was no real system or like process for dealing with children who were abandoned or if you didn't want them anymore. And so there was just these like random things where there was like orphanages that would take children and they were really cruel to them and children died in them frequently. And I think there was some kind of money situation where they made profit from the kids. And so that's why they did it. And there was also like churches that took in kids based on, these ideals of like humanitarian aid, but they were also really cruel to the kids. And sometimes people would just kill kids because they didn't want them. There was no system. And so firefighters were just like, dear God, don't fucking murder your child or leave it in a ditch. Just give it to us. We'll take it and we'll figure something out. And that's where that came from. that came from a time when there was just no system for how to deal with like children who were abandoned or orphaned or whatever. And firefighters were just like, we'll figure something out. Like, dear God, don't murder them.
And that is why people like firefighters and hate police officers.
Just that.
Well, because initially the original system was that people would leave babies on the precinct footsteps and the cops would just like, the fuck is this? And they would throw the babies in the bush.
They would come out and see the baby and they'd be like, put your hands up, not complying.
It's not cool, man.
Further, the vast majority of children placed by the program ended up in the rural Midwest, where they effectively became slave farm laborers or indentured servants to their foster parents, which is what you were just saying. Orphans were not a child who has been abandoned or separated from their family because of a variety of circumstances, such as death or just cruelty. They're potential slaves. People that don't have full human rights because they're children and can just become slaves. Because also, slavery was still a thing. The very first orphan train sent a group of 45 children from New York to Dowagiac, Michigan in 1854. These 45 children were accompanied by a single caretaker from the Children's Aid Society named E.P. Smith. Smith, under his own admission, immediately let 2 random passengers on board a riverboat from Manhattan adopt children from his group without conducting any sort of background checks or character assessments. I mean, that's like the joke that was made before. It wasn't even a joke. He was literally like, want one?
I kind of love it, though.
It was like offering chewing gum, like in a group. Like, you want one of these?
Well, especially because the fact that there's 45 of them. He's like, look, I'm literally not going to miss one. You want one?
Honestly, just like, my eyes are closed. Like, whatever you take, I didn't see anything.
You just have to tell me that you're not going to fuck them. You don't actually have to not fuck them, but just tell me that you're not going to fuck them.
Further, when passing through a railroad yard in Albany, Smith incorporated a random street kid into his group without even bothering to verify that the boy was indeed an orphan. He was just like, you seem like an orphan. He's like, actually, my mother and father are waiting for, oh, what are you doing? He's like, come on, you little parentless kid.
Little scamp?
This is unhinged. They're just like, fucking whatever, orphans. You are an orphan. You get to be an orphan. You get to be an orphan. You get to be an orphan.
It's like, sir, I'm 42. Do you have parents? No, they each died last year. You're an orphan! Come on!
Get in the train, baby!
Sir, I have a mortgage. Great! We can take it over collectively, and then we'll all share in the profits!
Maybe this isn't a dark cuts. Maybe this is the funniest episode we've ever done.
This is the greatest cuts.
After finding homes for most of the kids in Michigan, Smith sent the remaining children off on a train alone to meet up with a pastor in Iowa City who would attempt to place the rest of them. The trip was considered such a success that the Children's Society sent out 2 more parties of orphans the very next day. So these are just like roving bands of orphan traders.
I kind of love this.
It's like a circus traveling from town to town, except for instead of peddling, sideshow attractions and, elephants jumping through flaming hoops, they're just like, hurry, step right up, get yourself your own brand new, strong for labor, child orphan, now only $12.99.
He's just like, look into the eyes of these unloved, unwashed potential slaves. You too can teach them skills, menial labor, basic math. Do you have an abacus? Not anymore. Now you've got a child named Abacus. Abacus, come here. Count, Abacus. 1, 2, perfect.
It was like the 1850s version of like AI. Everyone's going around being like, oh, get ChatGPT, you can automate your fucking marketing business, or like you can make beautiful artwork with it or whatever. But back then they were just like, get yourself a little worker that can count for you and come up with ideas for your marketing business. Maybe if you started marketing towards housewives ages 35 to 44, it might expand your market. Look at that. Already increased your profits right there. Actually, that's a pretty good idea. I'll take 4. This was the state of adoption in America when Bola Georgia Tann was born on July 18th, 1891. Georgia grew up in a well-off family with her father, George Clark Tann, serving as a judge who held much sway in their Mississippi community. He was a powerful and domineering man who wished for Georgia to study music and become a concert pianist. However, Georgia, equally driven and stubborn, wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and become a lawyer. Despite this, a third path began to form in her mind at the age of 15, when she convinced a local wealthy couple to adopt 2 children that her father had been in the process of placing in the aftermath of a court case. Instead of feeling proud of her work helping these children, Georgia allegedly saw the event as a sort of transaction, a deal she brokered in a field of work ripe with untapped opportunity.
Can you imagine the pitch meeting, right? She goes in and she's like, all right, Dad, I know you're looking to invest. I've got this idea, right? It's an industry that's got great Q3 potential. You know, I just really think that, like, if we put some real money and some legwork into this, I think we can find real growth in this opportunity sector. That sector, child slavery.
At the age of 15, she was baby selling babies.
Yeah, dude. Baby geniuses, baby slave traders.
Baby geniuses for child trafficking. Jon Voight is also in that one. I mean, seriously though, like, she's 15 years old, which also is just fucking wild. There's like a judge and he like takes children away from some parents because of some court case or whatever. I don't know what the exact details of that were. So they have these 2 kids and then it's like, I'm going to get my daughter to help me take these children and get them adopted. Good thing it was bring your child to work day today.
Good thing it was indoctrinate your child into a life of pseudo-legal crime.
And then on top of that, she does it. And instead of being like, oh, that was nice. You know, we helped those kids and everything worked out. I mean, this whole system is fucked, but you know, at least we got those kids to a nice family. But instead of that, she's like, I just had an idea.
Dad, have you ever considered investing? Investing in what? Crime.
She was an enterprising entrepreneur decades ahead of her time. Even back in the late 1800s, she was figuring out scalability, synergy, connecting, you know, her personal relationships and her sales ability with the pipeline of children being funneled into the legal system. She was a young Steve Jobs. In her early 20s, Georgia continued to study law while completing a few social work courses on the side, eventually going on to pass the Mississippi bar exam. Despite this, mounting social pressures against women in law, particularly from her father, led her to eventually abandon this path and focus her attention on social work entirely. So literally, the reason why this woman became a human trafficker is because of sexist policies in the law field. They're just like, you can't be a woman lawyer. And she's like, all right, well then I'm going to sell slave children. Suck on that, patriarchy. After college, Georgia found work at the Mississippi Children's Home, where she almost immediately began removing children from impoverished families without legitimate cause. Georgia gained a reputation as a staunch believer that the poor were incapable of, quote, proper parenting, and thus held a stern hostility towards the families she was supposed to be helping. One of the first mothers she is known to have targeted was Rose Harvey, a young, poor, widowed mother who was pregnant and suffering from diabetes at the time. In the spring of 1922, Georgia drove to Rose's cabin early one morning while she was still asleep. Georgia then snuck around to the cabin's back porch and lured Rose's 2-year-old son, Onyx, out of the house and back to her car. Georgia then simply drove away and had her father sign legal papers declaring Rose to be an unfit mother and Onyx an abandoned child. She then promptly placed Onyx with a new family, presumably charging an inflated adoption fee in order to pocket a profit, as she was later known for. Rose was understandably horrified at the events that transpired, managed to scrounge up enough funds to secure a lawyer, but was unable to regain custody. Due to her failing health and lack of funds, Rose eventually was unable to continue pursuing the case further and never saw her son again. I spoke prematurely. Definitely a dark cuts. The fun is over. The Wild West of the 1850s is done, and the era of dark human cruelty is here. Because that's fucked.
We had our yucks. We got our chuckles in. We booked a ticket to Chucklesville. And now we're going through the desert of the real bullshit. And I, for one, want to get off. This is depressing as fuck.
It's very bad. Although I will say, Onyx, that's a badass name. But also, it sounds like something that a 35-year-old couple from Silver Lake would name their child.
Yeah, it does. But also, holy fuck, this woman just kidnapped this fucking kid. And her dad was, like, knew And her dad was like, yeah, unfit mother. Yeah.
There's so many horrifying things that were just said. We're not even scratching the surface. First of all, she said that poor people were unfit parents that weren't deserving of having their children, which is like simultaneously just like terrible classism, but also like eugenics, basically. There's like, we're going to reclaim your children from you. And like, you're not allowed to have children that are going to continue on in your, family lineage. We're going to take them and we're going to turn them into proper, real, affluent people or whatever, I guess, which is terrible. Also, this isn't just like, oh, there was an orphan and then they're being sold off, which is like terrible. This is just kidnapping. Like, this wasn't an orphan. This was just a lady's child. And she kidnapped him and sold him. Jesus Christ. Roughly 2 years later, in 1924, Georgia was fired from the Mississippi Children's Home when they finally caught wind of her reprehensible practices. She fled town with her coworker and presumed lover, Ann Atwood. Atwood was the daughter of a family friend and single mother to a young boy herself. So this is Ann Atwood, who was this partner that Georgia Tann had. Actually, I just realized we don't have a photo of Georgia Tann in here, so I'm going to pull that up real quick.
While you're doing that, I'm going to say Anne, something of a cutie.
Yeah.
Did she give a permission structure to selling children into slavery, breaking families, committing, some might say, the most atrocious sins possible in the human condition? Maybe. But she's got a cute bob, man.
She's a snack, though.
She's a snack, though. I'm like, what you got in that little journal you're holding there, Anne? You writing down your hopes and dreams? What are they? Are they to irreconcilably damage and permanently psychologically scar a network of people? Can I help?
I can fix her.
Yeah, I can fix her. And baby girl, don't spend more time with Georgia. Georgia on your mind? No. Like, let's do this. You and me, babe. Let's make some art. Let's not make some kidnapping children. Let's do some paintings. Come on.
A+ to everything that you just said. We also have this picture of Georgia Tann here. This is her a little later in the process. So, we don't get to see what she looked like in her early origin stories of becoming a human trafficker, but this was in her golden years of human trafficking.
This is Kingdom Come Georgia Tann, as opposed to Georgia Tann Year One. I never in a million years would think that this person is a monster.
I was just going to say, zero indication that this is one of the worst people in history. She looks like a kindly old lady. This looks like a photo of my grandmother from the 60s. Despite Georgia's known disdain for unwed mothers, the two were inseparable and lived together for the entirety of their lives after fleeing Mississippi. Georgia, Ann, and her son laid low in Texas, where Georgia inexplicably adopted a daughter herself, turning the trio into a clandestine family of 4. So she literally did say, I can fix her. Because she hated unwed mothers. She thought they were like the scum of the earth. And she ends up taking on an unwed mother as her partner. Literally a physical manifestation of I can fix her.
I'm telling you, man, that's the strength of Anne.
Eventually, Georgia's father managed to use his connections to secure her a job as the executive secretary at the Shelby County branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. So let's just take a little bit of an inventory there. So she kidnaps a child in an undeniable way. She's fired from the children's organization for kidnapping a child, stealing them from their mom. She flees the state and goes and lives somewhere else. Her father is aware of all this. He knows what happened. Not only does he help her, uses his connections to get her a job, instead of being like, wow, my daughter is a fucking monster and I'm never going to talk to her again. He helps her get a job at a different children's organization, being in charge of children again. Like, what the fuck? I know stuff like this happens still, where like a cop will like kill somebody and it'll be like investigated and deemed like unlawful, like it wasn't justified, and they'll get fired from that specific police precinct, and then they'll just go and get a different job at a different police precinct, like a different town, and people will just kind of turn their heads and be like, oh, seems good. Let's not do a background check at all. But like, she willfully was like, I'm going to kidnap children as part of a profiteering scheme. And then they were like, give her a job at the children's organization.
Yeah, but her dad helped her get that job, right? So it's like, we're going to set you up with a new job so that you can do more kidnap.
So you can continue the kidnap.
What are you doing for work these days? Oh, you're working at a grocery store? How many kidnap do you do there? Not much? What if I got you a new job with more kidnap?
I'm estimating that you can easily be doing 100% more kidnap in this new position.
You know, we opened this role especially for you. Our kidnap numbers are down year over year, and we really think that with your added expertise and your enthusiasm for this new role that we'll be able to maximize kidnap. So, please don't hold back. Just do more kidnap.
And here's the thing, I'm going to be honest with you. Our budget for this kidnap position is not where it needs to be for you. But I think that if you really take this and own it, we can justify to the shareholders to give you basically anything you want. This is a blank check of you to really carve out the kidnap arm of this company.
When you say that you've kidnapped once before, could you just kind of goose those numbers a little bit when you go in front of the board? You know, just kind of just like fib just a little bit, just bend the truth a little bit. Just tell them that you do more of that kidnap so that when you get in front of them, they have faith that you'll be able to do more kidnap.
Maybe instead of just, approaching it from a numbers base, like how many kidnaps you've kidnapped, maybe just say like, I have a decade of kidnap experience. I think that sounds a lot more attractive.
Yeah, we really don't want to get bogged down in specifics of how many kidnap or what the ethnic backgrounds or the kidnapped to child slavery pipeline is, because once we've taken the asset on board and then released the asset to the loving family, it's not up to us what that family does. So that's why we really want to focus on the kidnap aspect of this as opposed to the long-term sustainable growth aspect of this. So, just decade of kidnap experience.
My only question is, when do I start? Georgia, already in a lofty position, swiftly took control of much of the home's operations. It was here, based in Memphis, where the majority of her crimes would take place. So, Dave, speaking of children being exploited, do you have anything to plug?
I would like to plug my new graphic novel, which was made 100% child labor free, Mary Tyler Moorhawk. It's available now wherever you get books. Got a Publishers Weekly starred review. It was called a masterpiece on comicbook.com.
And in the Spice household.
It's a hybrid novel, graphic novel. The first half of it is a graphic novel told in the form of 9-panel grid comics. That's like a retro futuristic story about a group of globe-trotting action-adventure super scientists led by their plucky teen detective protagonist, Mary Tyler Moorhawk, as they attempt to stop the world from ending. The other half of the book is a novel written in the form of epistolary zines from a magazine that's being serialized 100 years in the future called Physicalist Today, where you're reading a bunch of articles from a journalist named Dave Baker, who's obsessed with a TV show called Mary Tyler Moorhawk that got canceled after only 9 episodes. And we follow him over the course of a strange and winding existential journey as he attempts to figure out who made the comics, why the TV show got canceled, why it only lasted 9 episodes, and his life's turned upside down when he realizes, oh my god, the guy who created Mary Tyler Moorhawk, my favorite TV show of all time, was named Dave Baker. Spandrew, what do you have that you would like to plug?
Well, if you want to pick up a book that was written by your dear beloved Papa Pricey, former co-host of the show, you can go to his website, which is still up. Somebody's still paying the server fees. I don't know who it is, some angel investor. dapricerights.com, and get Deadbolt AI Private Eye, which is a book about a robot detective in the future who solves crimes and grapples with his own sense of humanity. If you want to follow us on social media, you can go to Facebook and search Deep Cuts Podcast. You can search the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group where we talk about the show with listeners and people make memes, and it's a fun little community. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord, where we talk about the show, make memes, play games, and do a bunch of other cool stuff. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at Dead Boy Detective, where I make cool videos about a bunch of random stuff. Sometimes it's like fact explainer videos, kind of like a mini version of this podcast. Sometimes it's something like me showing off a spreadsheet that I created that automatically pulls in all my listener data from Spotify and organizes it into top 5 most listened to artists and top 10 most listened to songs of the week. and sends that to me in an email, and it goes mega viral, and I get a lot of weird sexual attention because of it for some reason that I fully to this day cannot explain. Yeah. Back to the show. Act 2. Supply and demand. By the 1920s, adoption had acquired a close association with infertility, humanitarianism, and societal advancement. Brochures and pamphlets of the era linked child placing with utopian progress. Adoption was promised to reduce crime, divorces, and poverty. Some advertisements even pushed adoption as a great way to, quote, fill all the churches and do real missionary work at home. Further, the introduction of affordable baby formula created the spike in adoption rates while simultaneously lowering the average age of children being adopted. Another especially prominent feature of adoption at this time was the idea of matching, or placing a child with a family so carefully and systematically that blood relation was rendered invisible and irrelevant. The mentality, as one would imagine, was saturated with the sentiments of eugenics, which were experiencing a massive rise in popularity in the early 20th century. It was commonly believed that people with, quote, preferable genetics were more likely to struggle with infertility. Thus, adoption was seen as a sort of workaround for this issue. Georgia Tann was no stranger to these ideas and used them heavily to her advantage. She often targeted blonde-haired, blue-eyed babies and advertised them to her wealthy clientele with a tidbit of made-up eugenics-friendly lore. Georgia frequently told prospective parents that the child that they were interested in had been the result of a one-night stand between a beautiful socialite and a wealthy doctor, stating they could not keep the baby simply because it would be disastrous to their respective reputations. So really, like, what I said earlier, like, it's still holding strong. She would have thrived in the modern-day tech industry. She's like Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos fame. Not only is she creating this massive business around selling children as sort of chattel, but she's also doing all these like really like tech industry, kayfabe, sales tactic things and like marketing where she's coming up with like fake storylines for children and marketing of like this one was the result of a one-night stand between a doctor with a IQ of 250 and a beautiful model. So it's going to be, you know, the ideal specimen for you. They're going to grow up and be super smart and hot, and your family line is going to transform into like the greatest, most famous people of all time. That's so like, you know, 2010s, 2020s tech industry kayfabe bullshit.
Gattaca, baby!
She would have thrived. Despite Tennessee law at the time stipulating that adoptions would cost a mere $7, Georgia was known to charge up to $5,000 for her services, the equivalent of roughly $90,000 today. She accomplished this by charging exorbitant fees for everything from travel to paperwork, all with the justification this was a rare opportunity to adopt a child of a far higher caliber than any other adoption agency would be able to provide. So still just like 2010s tech industry inflation of value tactics. She really was ahead of her time. And of course, I mean that sarcastically. She's a horrible person and this is fucking disgusting. It was a joke. I'm not really admiring this. In reality, the majority of children who found themselves in the Tennessee Children's Home came from poor, underprivileged families and were acquired through a mix of kidnapping and coercion. By 1929, Georgia had essentially staged a coup within the organization and officially named herself the executive director of the Children's Home. By this point, she had also already formed a network of accomplices and struck various deals to ensure a constant flow of babies. A constant flow of babies, Dave.
Human life.
A constant flow of babies. She had a baby guy.
She knew a guy.
It really is just mind-boggling. Like, this is so fucked up. I don't know if, like, from a details perspective, if it is, but from a conceptual perspective, is this the darkest of cuts?
No. Active killing, I think, probably.
The contenders are active killing, you know, genocide of millions of people. Chiquita Banana also just like genocides and things like that. From a pure just like human carnage perspective, it's no contest. But just from the idea of like trading human beings as like products is so fucking dark.
And I think they also are a little different in that Those are systems of power which house people that are making damaging and oppressive decisions. They're systems that are being carried out by people that are hurting other people, not individuals making those choices out of their own volition 9 times out of 10, or being misguided in their decision-making processes, right? Where this is a single individual coercing a large societal apparatus and governmental system that is supposed to be doing good, that is supposed to be helping people, and using it for profit of the individual and destroying families in the process.
Yeah, like it's so fucked up. And like I said, just conceptually, the idea of a sort of single individual creating a system like this, it's just horrifying beyond imagination. This is one of those stories where you just like, it's not that things like this don't happen, obviously. There's so much human cruelty in this world, and there has been for so long. But it's one of those things that, like, if you aren't a fucking maniac, you can't even imagine this idea or the fact that this would happen. If I never read this and you sat me in a room for the rest of my life, I don't think I would ever think of creating a baby selling network to profit off of kidnapped children.
Yeah, I never would.
She also arranged for the state of Tennessee to give her authority over all babies born to inmates in the custody of state mental institutions. And she had a local juvenile court judge, Camille Kelly, send as many children her way as possible. She was even friends with the mayor, E.H. Crump, and held sway in lawmaking relating to the regulation of her agency. Fucking E.H. Crump, man.
Dude, Christmas with the Crumps, am I right?
Yeah. Nutty Professor 2, The Crumps Child Slavery Edition. Here we have Camille Kelly, the judge that she was in cahoots with.
Camille Kelly looks like what I would have assumed Georgia Tann looks like.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because that's exactly what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking that, but what I was thinking was this person, I can't imagine them as a monster who's like selling children. She looks like she has the evil in her.
Yeah.
She looks like the villain from Matilda.
But she looks like if you took, what's the fucking TMNT villain who's a little brain riding around in a robotic suit?
Krang or an Utrom, depending on the timeline.
Yeah, Krang specifically. She looks like gender inverted Krang if you put her in like one of those little old lady going to Sunday lace dresses, going to church on a Sunday dresses.
Utrom, but make it church lady.
Utrom, but make it Karen.
The children's home also handled the placement of babies from local homes for unwed mothers. Though standard practice in these homes required newborns to stay with their mothers for at least 3 months, Georgia was known to stop by to collect children within the first 2 weeks of birth, stating that the, quote, court commitments required it. Eventually, Georgia began collecting babies directly from the delivery rooms, tricking mothers into signing release forms while they were still sedated and dazed after giving birth. Her friend, Judge Kelly, would then uphold the validity of these documents when mothers inevitably fought back and attempted to regain custody of their children. So, you know, it's already just horrifying enough, the idea of like taking, you know, orphan children, whether the parents died or abandoned them, and sort of entering them into this for-profit slave trading practice. But then it becomes not even that anymore. At a certain point, she starts running out of inventory, which is a horrifying way of saying it. And then it's no longer just, oh, we're taking these orphans and selling them. It's we're abducting hundreds of children from parents. They're not even orphans. They're just abducted children.
I mean, you say it just keeps getting worse, but like it's so depressing because it's kind of always worse. Like it's not that there's just like a new basin of terrible. It's just expanding outwards. There's just always more of it. It's equally bad at every stage, but the equally bad just gets multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And you want someone to check this. You want the institutions of power, you know, to be like, hey, are you selling babies? But no one does.
And, you know, people are going to roll their eyes, but this story is like really like a good extreme example of like unchecked capitalism. And it's like, you know, I don't necessarily hate capitalism, but the way in which it's operated in modern day in our country is very much like this, where the supposed free market that's supposed to regulate these things and keep everything in check just does not work at all. And what ends up happening is that in the ever increasing pursuit of more and more profits, which is just how corporations function now, there's a board of shareholders. And the expectation of the shareholders is not that the product gets better or that customers are more satisfied with the product, or that the product is benefiting X, Y, or Z group of people or people in general more and more, the expectation is that the profits just never go down. They always have to rise every year. The negative consequence of that is that if the pursuit is the rise of profits, that's not a pursuit of improving the product. That's a pursuit of improving profits. It's a separate metric. And so that can have sort of catastrophic or really unfortunate consequences, like, for instance, in the oil industry, where if the pursuit of rising profits is the case and not, supplying customers with affordable gas, then you can do something like hoard oil and not put it out into the market, which artificially inflates the cost of oil, which will increase an oil company's profits, but it will make gas exorbitantly expensive for the consumer. That's basically how things work now. And this is like a weird parallel of that, where it starts off already fucked up of like, I'm just taking advantage of this sort of unchecked sector of the country where all these children are just being like left by the wayside. And I've figured out a way to profit from that by taking orphans and selling them off and coming up with all these weird little tactics for inflating the value of them. But then in her increased pursuit of more and more profits, she's like, but like there's not enough fucking orphans. So now I got to start kidnapping people. And as she continues to just try to make more and more money, the extent that she has to go to in order to do that just gets more and more horrifying and more fucked up and illegal and cruel and damaging. Eventually, Georgia realized she could simply kidnap children and have all the proper documents falsified later. Thus, a common scheme she would pull was to have paid-off nurses to tell mothers who had just given birth that their baby required medical attention. Georgia would then smuggle the baby out of the hospital, and the nurses would tell the mothers that their baby had died. Jesus Christ.
Oof, that's like my nightmare. I don't have any kids, but that's my partner's brother just had a baby, and we were at the hospital. They were going to take the baby out of the room, and I was like, can I go with the baby? Can I go with the baby and make sure nothing happens? Not that I really think anything's going to happen. I'm just like, that's just so scary to me. It's so scary.
Yeah, who knows if any of my kids were actually ours? Anything could happen.
Yeah, the fact that they all have your nose and look exactly like you, they might not be. Who knows?
And as if all that was not enough, Georgia was even known to do rounds driving through poor neighborhoods in her pristine black Packard, asking children playing in yards and playgrounds if they wanted to go for a ride. She was like literally like a fucking person in a white van with candy. There was this like stranger danger panic that happened in the 1970s. And it happened again in the 1980s. And there was also this element of satanic panic. And then like it's happening again now where people are just like really concerned about stranger danger to a point that just doesn't actually align with statistics. Like kidnappings are extremely rare. They rarely ever happen. Like kidnappings by a stranger. Most abductions and kidnappings are people that you know, like a divorced couple, and the mom has custody and the dad will kidnap the child, or like a cousin or something like that. But like actual real stranger danger kidnappings rarely occur. But Georgia Tann was everything that people have been paranoid about for the last 50 years. Like she was literally that. She's literally driving around in a car being like, you want to get in? Want some candy?
The living embodiment of like the back of the milk carton, small child. It's just terrifying. Just fucking terrifying.
Alma Walton and Regina Warner, two of Georgia's employees, would make a trip to sell these children about every 3 weeks. Walton would travel to California and Warner to New York, each with at least 2 or 3 babies in tow. They would then set up in rented hotel rooms and hold meetings with wealthy couples, hoping to adopt one of the children they met. When all was said and done, profits were deposited into a secret bank account registered under a false corporation name. Georgia is estimated to have pocketed 80 to 90% of each sale, with the remainder being used to pay off her accomplices and a small portion going towards covering the actual legal fees associated with adoption at the time. She also failed to report any of this extra income to the Society's board or the IRS. Okay, hold on. Hold the fuck on. I can let all this slide. Kidnapping, human trafficking, cruelty to a degree that's almost a war crime, even though she's not in the government and it's not against a sovereign nation. But evading her taxes?
That's the line too far, huh? That's the line too far.
Why didn't Mr. Frankie do anything about this?
Where's Mr. Frankie when you need him, man?
I'm so disappointed. That's unacceptable. Beyond the pale. Tax evasion, Dave.
Tax evasion, bro.
Georgia is estimated to have sold over 5,000 children over the span of her career and profited at least $1 million, or roughly $11 million in today's money. Instead of playing the part of a humble social worker, Georgia was so confident in her schemes and connections that she openly indulged in a lavish lifestyle, driving fancy cars and socializing with prominent families, politicians, and legislators. Despite the Child Welfare League of America dropping the society from its list of qualifying institutions in 1941 due to its questionable record-keeping, the general public did not suspect a thing and continued to view Georgia Tann as a respectable and hardworking individual. 2 years later, in 1943, a wealthy businessman donated one of his Memphis properties to the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Up until this point, the society did not have any major housing facilities in the city, but instead operated out of an office with children awaiting placement being held in public facilities or foster homes. Georgia and her team quickly moved into the mansion at 1556 Poplar Avenue, splitting the first floor into offices and reserving the upper level for use as a nursery. At this new facility, Georgia's all-women staff wore all-white nurse uniforms, despite almost none of them having any formal training in the field. Secluded in this home, away from the prying eyes of those not in the know of Georgia's racket, conditions for the kids being processed through the society hit rock bottom. Basically, every form of abuse is alleged to have taken place at the behest of Georgia and her nurses. Children were regularly sedated in order to keep them quiet, and the vast majority were malnourished and weak to begin with. You know what this reminds me of? This is like so similar to what we learned about Mother Teresa. And the key difference, as we'll find out, we're not quite there yet, but the key difference is Mother Teresa was never like exposed, really. There was never a point where everybody was like, wait, she's a fucking piece of shit, other than like people in the outer edges of the Overton window. Like it's known, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not accepted by people who are in the Catholic faith in the way that like the internet contrarian Christopher Hitchens side of things is like, fucking Mother Teresa, though.
Yeah. And the big difference, I mean, I guess, you know, she was kidnapping children. I think that there are things that we explored with Mother Teresa that could be regarded as similarly illegal, you know, leaving people malnourished and on purpose to teach them some kind of lesson, and then they end up dying. Like, she's responsible for a bunch of deaths. Like, that's not less illegal than kidnapping children, I don't think. The big key difference is that she was shielded by the concept of religion. Like, everything she did, it was under this umbrella of, it's like part of our faith and we do it this way. You know, we leave somebody alone with their wounds to get sick and get infected because they're becoming one with God or something like that. Whereas Georgia Tann didn't have that like safety net. She was just like a private person making profit from this. I don't think it was really a real difference between the two, but she just didn't have that shield. Kids who fell into her care but were deemed undesirable were seen as worthless stock, and with Georgia's intense fixation on profit, she saw no reason to sink any money into kids whom she could not effectively advertise to her wealthy clientele. As a result, these kids were denied medical treatment when any maladies arose, and dozens were allowed to starve to death each year. It is estimated that at least 500 children met their fate in the home, though the exact number is still unknown. My God.
It just is, there's a part of me that understands someone who's greedy, fueled by a desire for wealth, and thinks that they can wrap their head around some version of, oh, I'm going to take this child away from this impoverished life, sell them to a rich family, and everyone wins. I get money, the kid gets a better life, the rich family gets an heir, and the, nincompoop who's in this poor slovenly background doesn't have to raise this kid. I can understand justifying that, I guess, maybe. Like, I don't really understand it, but like...
You don't agree with it, but like, you can see how somebody rationalizes that to themselves.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Thank you. Yeah, I can see how someone can rationalize that to themselves or talk themselves into that position. Letting 500 babies die, it's monstrous. It's monstrous.
Yeah, she's like one of history's worst villains that's really not that known. But we have some pictures here of this place. This is the, whatever you want to call it, the fucking torture dungeon that she operated out of in Memphis, Tennessee. And, it just looks like a modest Southern Gothic mansion a medium-sized mansion. And, once again, it looks pretty non-assuming. Like, even the inside, it doesn't look like this fucking cesspool of cruelty. It just looks like a little nursery with, like, some cribs. Like, you really would not get the sense from this that this was, like, the site of some of the most horrible atrocities that have happened in this country. Georgia Tann remained a respected figure in Memphis throughout the 1940s. She was particularly known for buying advertising space in the local newspaper, the Memphis Press Scimitar, every December to announce her yearly Christmas adoption drive. These ads typically featured pictures of happy children with captions reading, "They'd love to be your Christmas gift this year." That's still just dark. Even the, fake version of it, you're selling these children as Christmas gifts? But we have one of her ads here. You want to take a look at this and tell us what we're looking at?
Yours for the asking. George wants to play catch, but he needs a daddy to complete the team. It's a little photo of a smiling little boy holding a big ball. And then the next one is, they'd like to be your Christmas gift. And it's 3 little children sitting on the front steps of a building. And the text below it is completely unreadable, but presumably it's an ad saying, "Adopt us, please."
This is so bleak. It's just straight up like an ad. It's like an ad for fucking clothing and Macy's or something like that. But it's like kids. To the general public, Tann had basically been doing the Lord's work for nearly 30 years. However, on September 13th of 1950, the very same local newspaper broke the story that a, quote, black market for babies had been operating out of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. This came just 2 days after the governor, Gordon Browning, ordered a full investigation into the society after being informed of reports that the organization had been selling children for profit. The investigation immediately uncovered a shocking network of child trafficking and exploitation that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. The case became national news as the extent of her operations were revealed. The investigation quickly uncovered evidence of bribery, coercion, and manipulation of the legal system, alongside a widespread corruption involving local judges, politicians, and even law enforcement who were all complicit in Tann's activities. Initially, papers reported that the operation must have been running for 10 to 15 years, trafficking an estimated 1,500 babies. However, these numbers would only grow in following weeks as more information was uncovered. 2 days after the story broke, on September 15th of 1950, Georgia Tann died of cervical cancer at the age of 59. She lived a lavish lifestyle at the expense of others and died without ever being arrested. 3 months later, the state of Tennessee sued Tann's estate for $500,000. The case was settled out of court with Tann's beneficiaries only relinquishing 2/3 of her estate. So, Jesus fucking Christ. With all of the awful things and whatever comparatively worse level of psychic carnage and physical devastation can be attributed to somebody like Adolf Hitler, at least he died horribly, having finally come to the end of his rope and facing the consequences of his horrible actions. And, he took the coward's way out and fucking shot himself, but still, she never faced consequences for any of this.
Yeah.
And she died of cancer, so that's not great. I'm sure that wasn't fun. But still, she just got to fucking go peacefully into the good night.
Dark cuts, man. There's no silver lining. There's just no silver lining. It's just dark cuts, bro.
My God, that's so fucked. I'm familiar with this story. I'm not a scholar of it, and I don't think I really knew or fully remembered that detail of it, that she just died before she ever got in trouble. That's so fucked. The Tennessee Children's Home was shut down the very same year. Since Georgia's lover, Ann Atwood, was never officially employed by Georgia or the Tennessee Children's Home Society, she managed to evade any legal prosecution. Atwood went on to work as a secretary for the Boy Scouts of America and died of heart failure in 1996 at the age of 96.
She lived for 46 more years?
Yeah, and number one, good job on the 96 thing. Leave it to old Anne to pull that one off. But also, once again, I don't know how much she was involved in this, but it's assumed that she was involved with this to a level that is too far. It's assumed that whatever her involvement with all of this, it was enough to be bad. Enough that she's also a terrible person. So she also doesn't face any consequences for this. She goes on to work again in a children's organization for the rest of her life.
But also, are you really that surprised that it's the Boy Scouts? As soon as you read she went on to, illustrious career in the Boy Scouts, I was like, checks out.
Hey man, how dare you? I just did the Boy Scouts of America salute. Though Georgia's adopted daughter, June, has stayed out of the public eye, her daughter has gone on record stating that, quote,
"Mother said Georgia Tann was a cold fish. She gave her material things, but nothing else. I don't know why she bothered to adopt her."
Justice Camille Kelly, who is estimated to have provided Georgia with 20% of the children she trafficked, was never prosecuted as they could not prove that she received money from Tann for favorable court rulings. Nonetheless, Kelly had been ousted and promptly resigned, dying a few years later at the age of 75. California and New York, having received the majority of children trafficked through the Tennessee Children's Home, vowed to take action on the matter. However, no adoptions were ever investigated and no children were ever returned. In the years following Tann's death, survivors and families affected by her actions continued to seek justice and reunification. Unfortunately, Tann had destroyed any paper trail of the adoption so meticulously that such efforts were usually futile in a time before genetic testing. Nonetheless, parents and children alike spent their entire lives trying to find each other in hopes of reaching any sort of consolation for the trauma they endured. Due to Georgia's tactic of advertising to the wealthy and elite of California and New York, a number of high-profile individuals had used her services, some of which included actress Joan Crawford, who adopted twins, actress June Allison and her husband Dick Powell, and even the governor of New York, Herbert Lechman. Perhaps the most notable child to have been trafficked through the Tennessee Children's Home was a man who was considered by many as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, Ric Flair.
Did not see that one coming.
Ha ha ha! That's like the main thing when you see this story kind of like in the clickbait social media space. It's always like Ric Flair was human trafficked as a baby or something like that. Like that's usually like the way that it's presented. It's honestly the least fascinating part of the story, but it is fucking crazy. Ric Flair, baby. Nature boy himself.
Woo!
Rick is now known to have been Fred Phillips, though he was taken from his biological parents at 1 month old. Rick has stated that his adopted parents told him he was adopted at 5 years old, roughly 4 years after the crimes of Georgia Tann had been revealed, though he has never wanted to search for his biological parents. In recent years, Rick's biological brother has attempted to contact him, though he again claims to have no interest in striking up a relationship and rehashing that aspect of his life. Which honestly, makes sense. Like, something this horrible happens to you, like you find out that you were human trafficked, you were kidnapped from your real parents and given to a family. And there's a lot of stuff tied up in that, right? The horrifying revelation that your parents are not your biological parents, that you were stolen. There's a lot of probably grief that comes along with that. Grief at a life that you just didn't realize was taken from you. There's also some dubiousness around your parents, the fact that they were involved in this. Like, my parents adopted me, and they probably knew this was kind of a shady thing. Like, they probably didn't know that I was kidnapped, but it was too easy. It was too easy to adopt me. There's no way that they didn't know there was something. She probably had a reputation. People probably knew, like, oh, there's this lady that can get you a kid for fucking easy. They can get you a kid in your house tomorrow. And there's no way that you don't know that there's something shady with that. So then you have this idea of like my parents as these patriarchal and matriarchal figures that I respect and probably have some reverence towards. They might have the skeleton in their closet. I can understand that you go one way or the other with it. Either you're desperate to reunite with this family for closure, or you want nothing to do with it. You shut that off from yourself psychologically entirely. I never want to meet you. I don't want to think about this ever again. I can totally see a person going one or the other way with this revelation. Rick has also gone out of his way to emphasize that his adoptive parents were extremely loving and supportive, stating that they were such good people that he often feels as if he hadn't done them justice growing up. Today, 19 of the estimated 500 children who died due to Georgia Tann's neglect are buried at the historic Elmwood Cemetery with no headstones. Georgia had bought the cemetery plot in 1923, presumably to bury just the children she actually planned on reporting as having passed. In 2015, the cemetery raised funds to construct a small monument to the remaining children who were never accounted for, their final resting places still unknown. The revelations uncovered by the investigation prompted significant reform in adoption laws and practices to prevent such abuses from ever occurring again, though it still took years for significant changes to be implemented nationwide. And if you want to, you can go to memphislibrary.content and search Georgia Tann, And there's a bunch of interviews with children who had been trafficked by her, kind of giving their perspective on their lives and their feelings towards it. And it's really fascinating if you want to check it out. We're not going to read any of those on the show, but if you go to that website, there's a bunch of interviews with these children that were stolen by her. Heartbreaking and fascinating. Well, Dave, what do you think about the horrifying saga of Georgia Tann?
I know that you were shocked when it was like, oh, she was never held to justice. But there's a part of me, the cynical part of me, that's like, yep, checks out. You do something so monstrous, so close to the networks of power in an age before mass calls for accountability through the internet. And yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not saying that's a good thing. Just saying sometimes I have pessimistic days. Sometimes I have optimistic days. Today, big old Pessy, baby. And man, this is just so depressing on every level. My heart breaks for all the people that this was impacted. And it's just so depressing, too, when you think about, like, all of these people's lives fundamentally altered and made other. It's not even that it's good or bad or that, it's just not having their actual familial connection and not having that choice to be with those people or not. It's like fucking bleak. And also the fact that this fucking Ann Atwood woman lived to 96 years old and was complicit in all of this.
Yeah, and she's just hanging out and she's just like taking a bath and just being like, rested in my lane, unbothered. Yeah, it is horrifying. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, despite my shock, not even shock, but like sort of offense at the idea that she never faced consequences for what she did, I'm also not particularly surprised. And call me Pessy as well. Call me the Loch Pess monster myself. But yeah, I'm not super surprised at all either. And, stuff like that even still happens today. Jimmy Savile, is that his name? That famous British radio personality that after he died, it was found out that he was just like, he molested like hundreds of children and they all came forward. That dude lived his whole life and nothing ever happened. The story is so horrifying to the point where you almost sound like a broken record. Like throughout the episode, we're just like, this is fucked. This is bad. And it's almost like repetitive. It's just like, I don't know what else to say about this other than Jesus fucking Christ. But I would say that ultimately, like, where I land on that or my conclusion or final thoughts, that being said, is just that, like, one thing that sort of sticks out to me or strikes me is, like, we talked about how unregulated this whole world of orphan children was and adoption at the time. And, Georgia Tann may have been the most fucked up and most cruel version of it, but lives weren't good for any of these other orphans. I mean, at least the kids weren't getting fucking kidnapped, but for the actual orphans and people in the adoption system, like, life was pretty bleak. I am in no way saying that this justifies it, but, one thing you can say from this is, like, this thing that she did, as we kind of just wrapped up with, it expedited this process of better regulating this whole system and making the conditions for orphaned children much better, improving the lives of these children in this adoption system and helping kids to find families that were much better suited for them when they are in need of adoption. So that's the part that it kind of fucks me up, because it's like, this was so horrible, so dark. There's really nothing else to say about it other than it's just so fucked up. And yet it has this byproduct of expediting this process that improved the conditions of all these people. And once again, I'm not saying, oh, so that justifies it, but it really leaves me morally conflicted. And I think there's a lot of things like that in history where a really terrible thing sets precedent for much better things to happen and be implemented. And that's just a fucked up aspect of the human condition, right? Something really bad has to happen for people to finally realize that something good needs to happen. That's hard to process.
I have no additional thoughts other than I will say, despite being 96 years old.
Dave can fix her.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me on the internet, you can do so at heydavebaker.com. Please go pre-order my book. Well, actually, you don't have to pre-order anymore. You can just order my book, Mary Tyler Moorhawk, available wherever books are sold. Spandrew, where can people find you?
You can pay respects to the dear beloved Papa Pricey by getting his book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, by going to dapricerights.com and searching for it and picking up a comic about a robot detective. You can also follow us on social media by going to Facebook and searching Deep Cuts Podcast. Join our Facebook group, the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/DeepCutsDiscord. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at Dead Boy Detective. And you can also come to the Mystery Treehouse Children's Home and find yourself a brand new little guy. Ours are actually all cryptids. We've captured them and we're selling them as pets. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.
This episode of Deep Cuts was written by Armaun Saheli. If you're interested in writing an episode of Deep Cuts, please email andrew@boygeniusmedia.com. The incidental music for this episode was created by D. Catalano, whose music can be found at wekeepoddhours.bandcamp.com, and Dad Beats.